Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Mic's working. I'm Rhonda Riley, and I'm hosting for the seminar today. And I want to introduce Flo. Many of you probably already know her, but Flo is the literary manuscripts archivist and curator of the Marjorie, Kinnan, Rawlings papers at the University of Florida at the George Smathers Library, as well as executive director of the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings Society and board member of the Friends of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings Farm. And if you haven't been to that farm, you should go. She's published 2 books of correspondence from her literary collections and an award-winning article about Rawlings in the Florida Historical Quarterly. Flo is also having a birthday this week, and we share a birthday. We're born on the same day, a few years apart. But anyway, I will turn it over to Flo now, give her a hand, and I'm looking forward to it. Oh, I did want to say one thing. If you could hold questions until afterwards, and when it is time for questions, please wait for me to come with you and give you the microphone, because people at home or watching later on Zoom will not be able to hear you unless you have the microphone in your hand. Thanks.
Testing this mic, all set? Thanks, Rhonda, and happy birthday coming up this Friday. So those of you in church saw us milking the adulation of our friends. Thank you again. Okay, so as Rhonda said, my name is Flo, and I am a literary manuscripts archivist, curator of the Rawlings papers at UF. It is my great joy to do that job. I love it, and I'll tell you a little bit about Marjorie, and hopefully you'll catch the Marjorie bug as well. Today we'll discuss the novels of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, which highlight this particular region of Florida, specifically the Ocala National Forest in Marion County and the southwest corner of Alachua County. I hope you will be inspired to read some of Rawlings' work and also visit these nearby areas with a new appreciation for their history and their beauty. First, a bit about the author. Marjorie Kinnan was born on August 8th, 1896 in Washington, D.C. She attended college at the University of Wisconsin and fell in love with one of her classmates there, a young man by the name of Charles Rawlings. After graduation, Marjorie moved to New York City, and Charles went to serve in World War I. They were married when he returned from Europe, and they moved to Rochester, New York to be near his family. After her stint in New York City, Marjorie hated the provincialism of Rochester. In 1938, they took a vacation on a steamer to Jacksonville, and then up the St. Johns River on a smaller steamboat to Green Cove Springs, Florida. They were given a ride to Island Grove, Florida, where they visited with Charles's 2 brothers who were trying to make a living prospecting orange groves. Marjorie instantly fell in love with the place, and at her urging, she and Charles sold all that they had and bought a dilapidated farmhouse and a neglected grove in Cross Creek, a small village in southwestern Alachua County. And they moved there in November 1928. I'm going to give people a chance to get seated here. Their intention was to sit and write while the oranges grew and made their living for them. The first few years were extremely difficult. There was a freeze, and the Mediterranean fruit fly was out and about. The couple had little time for writing, what with the scarcity of everyday necessities and the work that needed to be done on the farm. Marjorie nevertheless began to record her impressions of the surrounding countryside and the fascinating people in it. In March 1930, she sold her first Florida story called Cracker Chidlins to Scribner's Magazine, and in December, her second story, Jacob's Ladder. Between her arrival in Cross Creek and her death in 1953, Rawlings wrote and published many short stories and books about the people and places in the region which she lived. The stories were published in Scribner's Magazine as well as other publications. So these are the books that are written during this period of her life. All of the books listed there were about people and locations in our area of Florida, with the exception of The Sojourner, which was set in rural Michigan, kind of, where her maternal grandparents lived. The two novels that I will focus on today are South Moon Under and The Yearling. Both are set in the Ocala National Forest area, also known as the Big Scrub. I'll also talk a little bit about her 1942 work, Cross Creek, set in the immediate area of her home and grove. This is the Big Scrub. She writes in South Moon Under, "There was perhaps no similar region anywhere. It was a vast, dry, rectangular plateau, bounded on three sides by two rivers. The Ocklawaha, flowing towards the north, on the left side of your screen, bounded it on the west. At the northwest corner of the rectangle, the Ocklawaha turned sharply at right angles and flowed due east, joining at the northeast corner the St. Johns River, forming the eastern demarcation." For those of you that are, I think there might be a pointer on here, which doesn't work. Within these deep watery lines, the scrub stood aloof, uninhabited through its wider reaches. The growth repelled all human living. The soil was a tawny sand from whose parched infertility there reared, indifferent to water, so dense a growth of scrub pine, the southern spruce, that the effect of the massed, thin trunks was of a limitless, canopied stockade. It seemed impenetrable, for a man-high growth of scrub oak, myrtle, sparkleberry, and tie filled the interstices. Wide areas indeed, admitted of no human passage. So the South Moon Under that I just quoted from, the setting is along that east side of the Ocklawaha, the west side of the Ocklawaha, east side of the east bank of the Ocklawaha, north of Eureka, and the time period is the early 1900s of South Moon Under. This is my favorite Rawlings novel, by the way. It's awesome if you haven't read it. So in 1931, Rawlings went to live for a while with this group, with this family called the Phidias in the Big Scrub. And you see Piety and Leonard Phidia there, photos of them. Piety looks like Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies to me, right? While there, Marjorie participated in daily chores of the family, such as quilt washing, and went hunting and fishing and shining with Leonard, meaning she helped and learned how to make moonshine, and Leonard had a business going on the side with that. Of course, this was during the Great Depression and during Prohibition, of course. Marjorie continued to write short fiction about her experiences, and at the urging of her editor, Maxwell Perkins at Scribner's, began to write South Moon Under, which was published in 1933, right at the end of Prohibition. If you wonder whether we're just imagining that Marjorie set South Moon Under in this particular region, take a look at this map on which she indicated locations of various episodes in the novel. So today you can kayak this part of the Ocklawaha River by putting in at Eureka Landing or a bit further south at Gore's Landing and go north with the current to find Phidia's Landing. So that's all here on the west side. You can see it's really kind of not bright enough because it's a washed out map, but this is an actual map where she imagined the time, the episodes in the novel taking place. And you see these lines here, that's written in Marjorie's handwriting, and we have this map. Its original is at Scribner's Scribner Archive at Princeton, but I requested a copy for our archive so that we could see this happen. And the same thing happened with The Yearling. So she, like, writing fiction, but then she's like, this is where this would happen. This was where, you know, the imagination just came through, but it was very geographically centered. While visiting the Phidias in 1931, Rawlings met a hunting guide named Calvin Long, whose family had lived in the Big Scrub since 1872. He became Old Man Payne in South Moon Under. His brothers Melvin and Calvin are shown here after a hunt. Such episodes are part of the Yearling story. Pat's Island is a little area a bit west of Silver Glen Springs, a spring on the west side of Lake George. As Rawlings explains in The Yearling, an island in the scrub is a pine island surrounded by scrub vegetation. On this visit, Marjorie listened to more of Calvin's stories and participated in their daily life while exploring the area. Evidence that Rawlings set the Yearling novel in this place is the map shown here on this slide. We see Marjorie's notes shown on this map. It says, the glen where Jody built the flutter mill is the spring run at Silver Glen Springs. So this says where the Baxters greeted the Huttos for the barn raising. Country store, if those of you have read The Yearling, again, where Marjorie is actually imagining the story take place. And amazingly, she took this map and mailed it to the people at MGM in 1940 when they were filming The Yearling. When they started to film The Yearling, the movie wasn't actually produced until 1946 because of the war and because it was because of production difficulties. I can go into that more, but an amazing movie. If you've ever seen that 1946 movie called The Yearling that starred a child actor heretofore never known, Claude Jarman Jr., who just died a couple weeks ago. We heard about him, and had a chance to visit with him a few years back, and he came to visit that place where he shot the movie some 60 years ago. So really interesting. More than 60 years ago, right? 1946. That's like 70 something years ago. Okay. There's Silver Glen Springs going out to Lake George. That picture, Rhonda just reminded me, that picture that I showed you of Marjorie at the beginning with the crab, that was taken here at Silver Glen Springs. Beautiful spot. I don't know if you've ever been there. The Long family moved to the shores of Lake George near Silver Glen Springs in 1872 and began to hunt and clear farmland on Pat's Island. Calvin's parents, Calvin, and several of his brothers homesteaded on this land in the 1880s. Here is an illustration from The Yearling of Penny Baxter carrying water for his crops. In the center of Pat's Island is a large sinkhole. Kind of hard to show a sinkhole on a flat picture, but 60 feet wide, and which provided vital water for the Baxters from the yearling. There's a sinkhole there. You can sit up there and look down into the sinkhole. Here's a photo of what Rawlings referred to as a pine island. So you see the nice, straight, beautiful, skinny trunks all lined up there like a stockade. So that would have been surrounded by scrub vegetation and therefore called Pat's Island, Baxter's Island, depending on where you were. At Maxwell Perkins, her editors, urging, she was beginning at this time to coalesce her ideas for what he called a boy's book about life in the big scrub. In the letters between Perkins and Rawlings, Max gently suggests a different focus for the story as early as June of 1933. Under Max's gentle tutelage, Marjorie produced what was to be her most successful book, The Yearling, in 1938. It was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Literature in 1939. Rawlings Cross Creek Farm and the surrounding area in western Alachua County are featured in Rawlings' 1942 semi-autobiographical anthology called Cross Creek. Thus begins Cross Creek. Cross Creek is a bend in a country road by land and the flowing of Loch Lusa Lake into Orange Lake by water. We are 4 miles west of the small village of Island Grove, 9 miles east of a turpentine still, and the other sides we don't count distance at all, for the two lakes and the broad marshes create an infinite space between us and the horizon. In a letter to a reviewer at Scribner's Magazine, she summarized how she became interested in this material and how she gathered facts. Quote, "This wild, beautiful country, tucked off the tourist's highway by no large number of actual miles, is in itself a challenge to the imagination. I had met only 2 or 3 of the neighboring crackers when I realized that isolation had done something to these people. Rather, perhaps, civilization had remained too remote, physically and spiritually, to take something from them, something vital. They have a primal quality against their background of jungle hammock, moss hung against the tremendous silence of the scrub country. The only ingredients of their lives are the elemental things. I have gathered my facts firsthand. Most of the material is to my personal knowledge. The rest has been told me here and there in the locality and is equally authentic." As you read Rawlings' work, I hope you now have a sense of the degree to which her sentiments in this letter do reflect her appreciation of the people, places, and history of our region. So some of these places that you might want to visit: the Yearling Trail, on Pat's Island, that's called the Yearling Trail, and you can get to it right off of 19, Silver Glen Springs, again, 19, the Ocklawaha River by boat or by kayaking. It's just absolutely beautiful. And of course, the Historic State Park. That's some photos of the Ocklawaha. That's my friend Ann Pierce on the Ocklawaha. Marjorie Rawlings Historic State Park. I hope you get a chance to visit, and I hope this little talk has sparked your interest in reading some more. Thank you, and I'll take some questions now if you'd like.
Hold on.
Phoebe?
Okay.
Phoebe was first,
Okay, well, we'll do that.
whatever.
And is the mic held this way or this way?
Either way, but the latter.
This is
I think,
better.
yeah.
Okay. My father was born in Connecticut. I'm a graduate of Hawthorne High School, by the way, so I'm very familiar with Cross Creek. My father was born in Connecticut. My mother is a cracker of Alachua County of the Hawthorne area. And the thing that drew my father down here from Connecticut was South Moon Under. He said when he read that book, he was so fascinated by a place that was like that, so primitive and rich and all those things. So that's what brought him here. And I read it as a teenager when he told me that, and I'm just thinking I probably need to reread it. And also, I wanted to recommend The Creek by J.T. Glisson. Are you familiar with that?
Oh,
I just read it, and we had Glissons in our school when we were in school. Not J.T. He's a little older,
Right.
a little bit before me, but it really tells you a lot about the thinking and the philosophy of the people there, and how that location really did affect them so deeply.
How tied they were to the land. And yes, indeed, like I said, South Moon Under started an obsession with me with the industry of moonshining and the illicit production of alcohol, which Marjorie enjoyed quite a bit on a personal basis. But she also learned how to make it. And I sort of like started studying stills and what happens and how you distill things. And that area, see if I can get to that slide. I'm not sure why it's not working anymore. Huh? Try again. Okay. That area along the St. John's, along the Ocklawaha, that's the yearling. Okay. So yeah, along the Ocklawaha here, they had like all these nooks and crannies, like where the cypress was growing in those swamps, and they had access to fresh water, which you need when you're distilling, and they had access to furtive, places. They go along the Ocklawaha, and then they go off on these little tributaries, and that's where they built their stills out in the woods. Now, how they built them and then found them again is unbelievable. A lot of times they would like camp out and get their supplies, the sugar that they needed. They got the fresh water right there on site, sugar and corn, and they would do their thing, and then when they finished, they'd take the casks of moonshine and get a big raft and get logs that were just like lying around from the lumber industry, make a raft, and then put their liquor on the Ocklawaha, which flows north. So all they need to do is get there and get to Palatka, and that's where they would sell a lot of the moonshine, pick up some more supplies, and then go backwards. So that was they went usually like overland after they dumped their wares in Palatka. Lance?
Let me see. This is, I'd like to share a personal reminisce. My mother was a longtime member of this church until she passed away in 93. But as probably a 18 or 19-year-old, she was writing a letter to my dad, who was in the Navy at the time, and my mother was still here. And so let me read from that letter. Oh, last week, Marjorie, Kinnan, Rawlings came to the Reynolds family formal dinner. Lots of people were a little disappointed because they expected someone very distinguished looking. I expected her to look rather like ordinary, everyday people do, since Mother told me about her, and I thought I would like her. She looks pretty much as a well-to-do Florida cracker's wife would, whatever that is. And I didn't know that her nose turned up before.
Okay. Wait, what year is that? Is that letter dated?
That was probably like 1943, 44.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
great. After
yeah. So her,
famous and
yeah, her dad was a biology professor at UF.
okay,
And,
okay.
so, that I guess, that this is sort of like Gainesville's connection to
Sure.
world literature.
Absolutely. Marjorie was good friends with John Tigert and his wife, and would socialize quite frequently in Gainesville with different families. So that's really fun. If you could email me the names of those people, your parents, I will look to see if in our correspondence, well, there are 40 boxes of correspondence. Marjorie was an extremely prolific letter writer. And so I can look to see if there are any people mentioned in the letters, or your mother, your grandparents, is that what it was? And see if I can find any more references to them in the letter. A lot of her letters are actually published, so you could look to see yourself if you could find some reference to them in the correspondence. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment just and a question. I know, like, it is impressive that she came down here by herself because she got divorced, right? I mean, or separated.
She got
separated.
with her first husband,
And-
Charles
yeah.
Rawlings, but then 2 years later she got divorced. 3 years later
Right.
she got divorced. So
I think I remember reading Cross Creek, and she's like
by
talking
herself.
about coming on the road, A1A, I guess, down to Florida and by herself, and how she had to do it by herself with help from the servants or people that she hired,
Right.
and I had read the biography of Prairie Fires of Laura Ingalls Wilder. And they came to Florida too back in the 1800s, I guess. And they couldn't make it. I was like, so, I mean, of course it was different timing, but,
Right.
and they came together, different things that happened to them, I guess. But I guess my question is, reading Cross Creek, I read The Yearling and I loved it, and I read Cross Creek. Those were the only two books that I read of hers. But the relationship she had with African Americans in that time, I don't know much about. I know the times were different, and in the books, the way she talks about it was like, oh, okay,
Not okay.
yeah, not
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Right.
Just like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know about that, but I have grandparents that were a little funny talking about things like that too. And and they are from like Philadelphia and area type of stuff. So, but do you have any comments, since you're an expert on her, about that?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question. That comes up fairly often, right, Peggy? There is like awful language in Cross Creek, and I'm not making excuses when I say that was like hideously racist, the way it sounded. Very interestingly, however, Marjorie was considered very progressive in her time. She treated the African Americans in her employ better. She paid them better. She treated them like human beings, and paid them, well, and made sort of accommodations for different issues that came up. Like she would bail people out of jail if they got into trouble. She would help people financially. In her will, she put a monthly pension for Martha Mickens, who figures prominently in Cross Creek, for her to be able to live there at the creek and have an income until she were to pass away or move away. So that, and another instance is where she wrote to Alachua County superintendent to try to get a bus for the child of a woman who was working with her to get to school in Hawthorne from Cross Creek, which didn't work, but she was an advocate. She writes, especially later, after she became friends with Zora Neale Hurston, she sort of had a come to Jesus moment and said, you know, this person's my equal. I'm going to do everything I can to help the cause of the Negro people, as she called them. And so there was sort of, she was born in Washington, D.C. There was, you know, a lot of racism growing up in the South, and which was considered the South. And to a certain extent, she did have a metamorphosis, especially later in her life after she met Hurston in 1941. And so, yeah, there was a transformation that took place. Lois?
I was going to ask you too about her attitudes towards race. Would you say she was at least as enlightened, even though her attitudes were patronizing as whites were in the South, that they were sympathetic to them at least, right?
Yes, yes, sympathetic, compassionate, but with that rearing of we've got to do something, but in a
them, right.
patronizing fashion. Yeah, yeah.
And also, I was wondering if people here knew that, well, first, my backup. There's an incident in Cross Creek where she pays the medical bill for a Black person, right? Is that accurate, or was she fictional?
I can't remember who that is, but is that in Cross Creek or?
It's in the book Cross Creek that I
Okay.
remember when she portrays herself as being really benevolent towards them.
Mhm.
I was wondering.
Yeah, it's a little self-serving and patronizing in some fashion. But really, I mean, she did what she could. And I think it was Samson who had gotten in a fight.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
I can't remember which chapter, the chapter Dark Shadows and Get One Young and Geechee, the three troublesome chapters in Cross Creek where she gets that, you know, her petticoats show,
Right.
her racist petticoats show.
And then I was thinking that maybe people might not know that the Ocklawaha was the river that was going to be the conduit for the Cross Creek Barge Canal. And it's still dammed.
Right.
Right?
That's right. It was not. At this time, of course, there was no Rodman Dam. There was no, the Ocklawaha just flowed unobstructed into the St. John's, which someday there might be happening again.
My husband grew up in this area and did lots of kayaking and canoeing, and he said that it was the most beautiful river in Florida, you know, until they did that. And if you drive down 441, there's an area where there's a dividing island between the two lanes of traffic going each way. And you can still see one of those supports that was built that was supposed to be for the barge canal to go up above. Right. But as I understand, it's a fishermen of Florida who like that canal, they like that dam because it gives them good fishing. So anyway, it's the last of the cause.
The bass fishing, Peggy has a question. Oh, and work your way around.
So, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, good. Zora Neale Hurston's birthday was January 7th, and I just read, I think it was in the New York Times, a piece about her, but one of the things that it referred to was how Alice Walker, the writer, went and found Hurston's pauper's grave that was unmarked down in South Florida and was kind of the beginning of bringing Zora Neale Hurston's right back to life. But my question is, and Alice Walker wrote an article apparently for Ms. Magazine in the early 70s. Flo, as the archivist, how do I see that article? I would love to read it.
The article is not from 1976, and if you, well, I guess it's a paywall or something. It's in the archive. We have that article, and you can, if you're like on campus, obviously if you're associated with UF, you have access to these databases, and you just search for Alice Walker, Ms. Magazine, I think it's 76 or 77, and you can access that that article. But yes, it was and getting back to the Marjorie connection, they were good friends. Zora wrote to Marjorie like a fan letter. They visited in Marjorie's second husband's hotel in St. Augustine, which is now the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. And they visited there and became friends. Zora Neale Hurston visited Marjorie at Cross Creek several times, and so that friendship was like I said, really instrumental in moving Marjorie along with civil rights, on the civil rights. But yeah, the amazing, heretofore unpublished manuscript from the UF archive called The Life of Herod the Great is going to come out at the end of this month. It's published by, the editor is Deborah Plant, who was formerly a professor at USF. She took like 10 years and to piece together the pieces of this manuscript by Zora Neale Hurston in our library. And finally, it's coming out in print by HarperCollins soon. So look for that. If you're to learn more about Zora Neale Hurston, amazing person and really an interesting topic in itself. Barbara.
I wanted to ask a question about your workflow.
Yeah.
Because what's it like, or what do you do to be an archivist or the curator of the Rawlings papers? And have you had any like amazing discoveries in your
Sure, yeah. I mean, I love this job. I learn something every day. I work with amazingly brilliant people that love history and that love literature like I do. There are students that are coming in all the time to view the materials. You know that internet meme that says, describe what you do badly? Like, like a surgeon will say, I cut people to pieces. And, when I see that, I say, I read dead people's mail. And, and I publish it too. So that's it sounds creepy and fun. And so I'm just going to have fun every day until I retire, and then I'll have some more fun. But yeah, I have a library degree, a master's in library and information science, as it's called. Also from USF, and there's also a program at the university, at FSU. There's no library program at UF, so I had to go elsewhere for that. But since I was already working in the libraries, UF paid for my tuition, so that was really nice. I got the tuition benefit thing going. They don't do that anymore now. It's only for degree programs at UF. But it definitely helped me. And so my career path was I worked as a library assistant. I shelved books at Georgetown when I was an undergrad and always liked the library work, as a work study. And then kind of circled around and went back to the library profession, getting a part-time job when I was a young mom at UF, working in the libraries. And then I was assistant to the rare books curator, and in my work was taking care of reclassifying all of Rawlings' works. So I started reading them instead of putting them away and describing them. And just fell in love with her work and said, I'm going to go to library school and try to do this full time after my kids are grown up enough to go to school. So that's what I did. And And I've been doing that ever since 2005. I got the librarians are faculty at UF, so that makes it nice. You have to go through the whole tenure and promotion business, but that wasn't really a problem with me, and I got, I made a great career out of it. So I don't even have a PhD, so it's something where you get to be a faculty member and enjoy the work very much.
Could you go into Zora a little bit more and talk about the collection that you have of her manuscripts and how you acquired them? It's one of my favorite stories.
Is everybody okay with, I want to exhaust the Marjorie questions before I jump on Zora, because, well, both of them, they're like my two girls, right? I'm like, I have two daughters in real life, and then I have two baby daughters with these collections. And the intersection of them is like one of the great stories when you have collections that talk to each other, like intellectually from the grave. That to me gives so much more richness and interest to the individual collections. They're not like pillars, standalone kind of things. The Zora Neale Hurston papers. Zora died in January of 1960, and she was broke. She was, her books were out of print. She was very famous during the Harlem Renaissance period, but this was long afterwards. This was in the late 50s and 1960s. She was struggling to get this book, this manuscript called Herod the Great, to get it published, and nobody wanted to publish it. So her books were out of print. She was broke. She was having health difficulties. She was 67, I think, when she passed. And she was a ward of St. Lucie County. They had put her in a nursing facility in Fort Pierce. When she died, the landlords of her home hired some people, some neighbors, to clean out her house and to destroy all of her effects, because nobody came forward and said, this is like Peggy was saying, a pauper's grave in Fort Pierce. She was, they ordered the materials to be destroyed. So they took all of her papers, her manuscripts, they put them in a burn barrel, and they set them on fire. So a friend of hers who was a sheriff's deputy in St. Lucie County, and a friend of hers saw what was happening, and he literally pulled over on the side of the road, took a hose and put it in the burn barrel and extinguished the flames. So pulled out all of these soaked and singed papers, and when you see the manuscripts at UF, that you can see the water damage, the fire damage, et cetera, including this Herod the Great manuscript, but all of her correspondence as well. And the friend of hers who dried them out on her porch said, these need to go to a research institution. So they were like boxed up, dried off on the porch, sent to UF, and when they got here, the people, this was 1960s, they microfilmed everything, and they said, nobody touches the papers, they're too fragile, right? Well, nowadays, we received a grant, we got funding to encapsulate these manuscripts and preserve them. So now your grandkids can come to UF and they'll be able to see the Zora Neale Hurston papers. I should probably do another seminar just on Zora Neale Hurston. It's so fascinating. It's quite a story, and to me, it's like an archival superhero story. This sheriff's deputy, God rest his soul, and send him straight to heaven for rescuing those materials and getting them. It is the most heavily used collection by far. I think I did like 25, 30 classes last semester on Zora Neale Hurston, and with all the interest in the book coming out, and and her somewhat controversial views on race and the NAACP and desegregation, all of those things. Zora was quite a character and quite controversial, but to have that story and this archival miracle that happened where they're preserved, is quite encouraging. And Helen loves that story, so I had to tell it. Candace.
So these are, I won't say silly, but uninformed questions. But can you go back to the early picture you had? Oh, that was it. So
Granny.
picture up in the left. I just wanted to let you know in case you don't know this. Randy Batista did a series of black and whites on the rural people at Acorn Clinic. And one of the photos looks almost exactly like this. I mean, the dress was a little, but, it's kind of poppy,
Yeah. But they had like a lust for living, that Leonard was the moonshiner, the son, and Piety. I mean, read South Moon Under. Oh my God, that's gonna resonate so much with you, because I mean, Piety is the figure is named Piety in there, and Marjorie writes about Piety like being as small as she is. She's like lifting these heavy, soaking, wet quilts that she was washing in the creek. Like just throw them in there, pull them out, and extremely strong for her size. So
I guess the two other points I have with that particular photo, and if you don't know who Randy Batista is, he's very well known artist, photographer particularly, but yes, a presidential award. But what's different about this picture? So first of all, he did these pictures in the 70s. This is the 40s. So I just wanted to point that out. And also in the picture that he did, there was a young child with people looking that age. And it always struck me how old they looked. They probably were not that old.
That's right.
But they looked,
yes,
which happens for people that work in the field. So then my other question, which is really silly, when I was a college student here in the 70s, there was a restaurant called, was it called The Yearling? Did you all know about that? Okay.
I ate lunch there yesterday.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you gotta go. It's great.
Okay. I thought
it same menu.
Fried green tomato.
Prices have been older.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I have gator tail there, and my favorite is their catfish. Oh my God, so good. But yeah, it's still open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We had a board meeting of the Rawlings Society there at the restaurant. You can sort of reserve the back room, which has all these like amazing cracker artifacts, old-timey things. You think you're back in 1940s, sitting in that restaurant, except for the prices. Yeah.
You didn't mention the lawsuit that happened because of Cross Creek.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, that's probably a whole nother seminar too about the play and everything. But I thought that was really interesting how people were very much more cautious after that happened about actually naming people in there.
Yeah. That's sort of like good point. That was she was sued for libel, which then got changed to invasion of privacy in 1943 after Cross Creek came out, because she named her friend. She used the first name only of her friend Zelma Kaysen, who ended up suing her to try to redress the characterization of her. Michael Gannon, very famous local history professor and former priest, wrote a play called My Friend Zelma, and it's going to be presented about that trial. There was another one called, the book was called Invasion of Privacy. I can't remember what the other play was called, But again, that whole saga of being sued, Marjorie ended up being exonerated in Gainesville at the county courthouse, but then Zelma's lawyer appealed and went to the Florida Supreme Court, where Marjorie was found liable for that, but fined only $1 in reparations. So neither party benefited from that. Marjorie was convicted, and Zelma only got $1 out of it, plus the court costs. So. The first weekend in April, I think April 4th and 5th, or 3rd, 4th, something like that, in St. Augustine. I'm not sure where, but it's Deborah Dickey, who goes to this church, is the director.
You want to repeat what? She didn't have the mic, so for the audience at home or on Zoom.
Of course. The question is, when and where is my friend Zelma going to be staged? And it's going to be in St. Augustine in the first weekend in April.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
One of the things you referred to in some of the descriptions is an island. And did people use the term island to describe a place where the scrub is not so dense? I mean, it's not an island in that it's surrounded by water. It is an island in that it's a slightly open place surrounded by really dense vegetation.
Rob, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
like in that
island.
passage that I read from South Moon under.
Okay,
I just
just to clear that, because I'd never heard that term.
Yeah,
used.
that's definitely the case. Do you want to talk about Pine Islands, Tim? This is a Pine Island. Yes.
Well, it makes sense that it would be, because it's a place where people can live, right?
It's landlocked,
but it's not surrounded by water, but surrounded by just
right, and
places they can't live.
Impenetrability of the scrub around this. Obviously, you can move through this.
Yeah, I just never heard the term. Did you have one, Mike?
I mean, Flo, through Marjorie, described very well the scrub, which is dense, low-growing sand pine and scrub oaks, very impenetrable, which is sort of the matrix there with these islands of longleaf pine, different species of pine, which has different growth form and also different adaptations to fire. So the scrub is adapted to relatively infrequent fires that completely burn everything up, and then the sand pine and oaks regrow, whereas the Pine Islands have more frequent but lower intensity fire that maintains the longleaf pine. And they still call them Pine Islands if you go to the national forest there. As far as I know, it's not real clear why the scrub is where the scrub is and the Pine Island is where the Pine Islands are. The soils are similar, water availability is similar. I suspect it's just sort of there was variation in how disturbance occurred, and then sort of a self-reinforcing situation where the Pine Islands are where they are. But they're beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
Go there.
Stunning. The Yearling Trail is worth going to. We try to make a pilgrimage there every year, every spring, to see this land and to sort of pass through these different areas.
I'd like to add another plug for The Creek by J.T. Glisson.
Yeah.
He spends a lot of time explaining how the Creek folks were able to easily have almost interstate highways to their perception through these impenetrable scrub areas. And he has a wonderful chapter about when they escaped the revenuers who were trying to catch them for catching too many fish.
Right.
And it's that chapter is worth the whole book.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. And that chapter where he talks about the bridge, which still stands, the 1940 bridge is still there, Cross Creek. I go over it really slowly because I want to see both sides, and it's really beautiful right there on 325. And you can imagine those stories come to life. It's very little has changed, and the roads repaved, thankfully, but besides that, it's kind of a place frozen in time. The friends of the Marjorie Rawlings farm bought a new to us 1940 Oldsmobile to replace the one that had literally deteriorated to the point of being unsafe there in her carport area. And I had the privilege of driving it into the carport, well, being pushed into the carport, but I was steering. I really was steering. And so there's a new car there, and when you walk into the park, it just seems like Marjorie's about to come out of the house with her keys in her hand, and ready to drive away. So it's a place frozen in time, and I recommend. They have great interpreters there. Peggy's done years and years of volunteering and employment there. And they paid you, yeah. And so they have a great staff there, and I recommend you visiting and taking a tour.
I have a question. There at the farm, are they still, do the people in charge of it still cook from her cookbook? While
They do. They do. There are volunteers that get that wood stove going. Again, the Friends of the Farm paid to have the chimney relined and the wood stove lifted up and insulated underneath so that you can actually burn in the stove and do that safely. Every year around Christmas time, just before, well, usually like the first weekend in December, we have an open house event where the park is open at night, and they set up luminaries along the pathways. They had somebody actually baking cookies in the wood stove and cooking some of Marjorie's oyster stew for the volunteers that were working there at the event. And it's open to the public. It's free, and you can visit the house all decorated, bedecked with candles and lanterns and get the holiday spirit. There's music and cookies and refreshments and stuff. It's really a lot of fun.
It's 12:30. Any other questions? We have time for maybe one more. Well,
if not, if you're interested in the Rawlings Society, I was going to put it up on the board, but I forgot to do that. rawlingssociety.org. We have an annual meeting. We have, and also the Friends of the MKR Farm is a citizen support organization. You may have heard of Friends of Paynes Prairie. Well, we have a citizen support, a CSO for the Marjorie Rawlings Park. Lots of great events like the one I just described in the holidays. We have a birthday party for her in August. Damn her for being born in August. It's really like awfully hot there. But we sit there and we eat mango ice cream from her Cross Creek Cookery book, and usually eat some cupcakes and sweat and have a good time.
so thank you.